Today, we're going to be going into the basics of TSCA, Toxic Substances Control Act, which in the United States is the main legislation by the EPA or Environmental Protection Agency where chemicals are registered, and then we also protect against the toxicity of different chemical substances through this legislation. Now, it was originally enacted in the 70s because there was a growing movement throughout the 60s and 70s about toxic chemicals being emitted by industries. So those would include things like PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, and dioxins. PCBs were something where I grew up that was a big deal because they were emitted by the paper industry, and then they could essentially be emitted into waterways, and then the waterways could be so toxic that people weren't able to swim on the beach for like 20 years. So as PCBs are very toxic to the environment and then also to people as well. So because kind of environmental testing started taking off in the 60s and 70s, and people noticed that these chemicals being emitted from industry without little oversight from the U.S. government, that kind of prompted this legislation. Now, TSCA is definitely different than European REACH. EU REACH is the European Union's basically version of TSCA. That is quite a bit more thorough because it requires manufacturers or importers to do very thorough testing and submit a registration dossier that contains very thorough test data before again doing any manufacturer import, compared to the US where it is more risk based and the testing isn't mandatorily required. Now, in order for a chemical to be manufactured and imported into the US, it needs to be listed on the TSCA inventory, which again is an inventory of all chemicals that are known to be manufactured or imported within the US. Some of the major sections of TSCA would be Section 4, which the EPA can require manufacturers, processors, or importers to conduct testing on the chemicals if they find that the chemical might be an unreasonable risk, or it's in large quantities, you're importing a lot of this chemical, or there's no data, there's current data gaps, so there's the EPA doesn't have data available. There's not data in existing tox or ecotox literature anywhere in the world that they feel is of a high enough quality. So the EPA can issue test orders or test rules or consent agreements to require, again, these manufacturers and importers to conduct toxicology testing, ecotoxicology testing, things along those lines. Now, Section 5 of TSCA is for when you have a new chemical or a significant new use of a chemical. So this could be, again, you have an entirely new chemistry that, if you search the TSCA inventory, both the non-confidential section with a CAS number and then the confidential section, which is a topic for another day, but if you search the inventory and determine that this chemical is not present, you can submit a PMN or pre-manufacturer notice. You have to submit it 90 days before manufacturing or importing a new chemical. And sometimes then the EPA will delay this. It depends on their staffing at the time of how long they will be able to process these. But within 90 days, the EPA is required to either accept or deny or ask for additional time. Now, also, if you have a biotech or microbial substance, you can submit a MCAN or microbial commercial activity notice for new microbial applications. Now, if you have a significant new use of a chemical, that's another submission that you can submit. It will be called a SNUN, Significant New Use Notification. You can determine if you need this by looking on the TSCA inventory, which is available on their website, and then seeing if that CAS or substance has a SNUR, which is indicated by an S in the Excel document. And then that would tell you if you needed to submit a significant new use notification. That would be if you're using the chemical in a significantly different way than is currently known in the industry. So again, if they're using this chemical as like paints on a car, a vehicle, and then you're going to use it in some completely different application to clean, an airplane or something, then that would require a SNUN. The You can read through the EPA legislation on the significant new use rule for that specific substance to get more information on what the EPA would consider a significant new use. Section 6, existing chemicals for risk evaluation and risk management. So TSCA, this legislation was amended about in 2016 with the Lautenberg Chemicals in the 21st Century Act. It was a revision of TSCA, trying to modernize it a bit, modernize some of the data collected, make it maybe a little bit more like EU REACH. In the European Union requires quite a bit of test data, and it can be expensive and very challenging for the manufacturers and importers to comply with because it can take years to generate this data and cost a substantial amount of money. So I think the US approach is they don't want to create as much burden on industry, but still try to modernize their chemical legislation. So, anyways, this section of TSCA allows EPA to prioritize chemicals for risk evaluations and then implement risk management rules if unreasonable risk is found. So, basically, EPA can get a list of substances that are suspected to be toxic and then do further research on these and then start to implement rules that prohibit or restrict certain uses to try to lower the risk to industry and the consumers as well. Section 8 is a big section in TSCA. Reporting and record keeping. This is a section of TSCA where you're required to do chemical data reporting or CDR reporting. This is every 4 years you have to report on production volume, use, a few other data points for select chemicals to the EPA. This is also you have information on health and safety study reporting, adverse reactions. So also under Section 8 of TSCA, PFAS reporting is encapsulated within that section, and that's kind of like one of the hot topics lately. Basically, EPA is requiring any person who manufactured or imported PFAS containing articles is currently in scope, but being debated to be removed. But basically, anyone who manufactured or imported PFAS from 2011 has to report on this information to the EPA. And, obviously, presumably, EPA is using this information to consider future legislation, risk management. So information you'd have to report on these PFAS would be the chemical identity of the PFAS, production processing volumes, uses, byproducts, disposal, exposures to workers in the environment, and other known hazards. So that's one of the hot items. All right, so I think today that is going to conclude our video. Obviously, there are a lot more sections to TSCA. There's a lot more to it, but that's just a brief overview of some of the high points. So have a great day. And if you need any further support, please visit regaihub.com. We can always help with chemical compliance, product stewardship, and regulatory registrations. Thanks.